trip after class.
I think we need to get you a better title for your thing, like Vice President of Operations of Meeting or something, maybe.
My actual title is so long, that's why it's not on there. Plus, I'd rather stay a little anonymous.
We can just go with initial name.
Yeah.
CV.
Just different places on the coast.
Kind of like, you notice I scoot over to this corner and it keeps me on the camera.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
So that's the same.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Administration and Public Works Committee meeting for Tuesday, February 4th. Let's start with the first item on the agenda, the roll call.
Chair Garatano,
Present?
Councilmember Bertolino,
Here.
Councilmember Roast,
Here.
Councilmember Bowe.
Here, John.
Yeah, I'm not here.
I saw ya.
Present.
Councilmember Edens.
Here.
Councilmember Farmer.
Here.
Councilmember McCune. Councilmember Remy.
Okay, thanks. Moving on to the second item of the agenda, we have the approval of the minutes for January 7th, 2019. Is there someone that would like to make a motion for approval of the minutes made by Councilmember Farmer, seconded by Councilmember Edens? Any items that were brought up, with the motion on the floor? Okay, so the motion is to approve the minutes. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, minutes are approved. Okay, item number 3, public participation. Do you have any comments, any comment cards?
No.
Okay, no comment cards? Okay. Then we'll move on to item number 4, administration. So, first section A for information, this is one, the discussion of mayoral appointments. So, this was brought up, if I recall correctly, by Councilmember McCune, and I don't see Councilmember McCune here. She did inform that she's not able to attend tonight. So, at this point, unless someone has anything they'd like to speak on it, I would suggest we move this to a future meeting and have that discussion when she's available. Okay? So, I don't think we need to make a motion for that, right? No, that's fine. We'll just defer that for a future meeting. All right, administration B for action. First item on the agenda is the approval of the proposed email use policy. This is a continuation of the discussion that we had at the last meeting, and the city attorney had some direction from the committee regarding the proposed email use policy. So, you want to share an update on?
Sure.
Yep.
At the last meeting of the Admin Public Works Committee, I was asked to add language that prohibited the transferring of emails from the city email account for private purposes unless a records request was made, and that's what I've attempted to do in new paragraph 9 of subsection D of the draft policy, which you'll see on page 4. Again, the intent here is consistent with the overall purpose of the policy, as stated in the initial paragraph, which is the recognition that the email system and any information you gather in your official capacity is the property of the city, not any individual person. So the use of that information through your capacity as a council member should not be transitioned to a private or personal purpose without going through the same process as everyone else does, which is making a sunshine law request.
Thank you. So you've heard the city attorney provide an update on that section that was requested to be modified here, and so, any comments or questions on
Yes,
that?
I just have a question. Since we added number 9, do we need to strike number 7? Because number 7 to me reads as a standalone statement and not specifically under section 6 with mass communications.
Number 7 is different. And we define email forwarding as opposed to forwarding of email. That might be a little bit confusing as the automatic forwarding of an email. So that's where you can't, and I'm going to show my age a little bit here. We used to call them POP accounts, where you set up your email so it automatically sends it to something else.
Okay.
That's what that is defined to mean. So it is different.
And that definition is on page 2. Does that answer your question? Councilmember Eads?
Hang on just a second. Okay, yeah, it does. I read that as not specifically automatic email forwarding.
Understood.
Okay.
Councilman Bertolini?
Yeah, John, just for clarification, under the definition of, where you say prohibited unless it is being done in connection with official business of the city, I assume that means if there is a exchange between council members or between Sam and I or whatever, and a citizen in my ward, it's on a subject that they're interested in, it's okay for me to forward that to that person and say, hey, Joe, here's the conversation I'm having with our city administrator on this, just to let you know. Is that all right?
Obviously, depending on the specific content, but generally speaking, yeah, that type of communication should be fine. We do define in the policy what official business is, and as long as it's consistent with that, that should be
Okay.
Councilmember Remy?
I actually don't like some of the language here, and I would make a recommendation to put a period after the word prohibited. Again, scratch the rest of it.
Wait, we're at?
Number 9.
Okay.
But we can craft this language, I think, in a little bit different fashion, because I think to Councilmember Bertolino's point, if you are forwarding to a citizen in an exchange for something that's, say, relevant, like a street improvement or something, I think that's acceptable, but it's not acceptable to forward to any personal email accounts at all. And that's not clear to me in that little, I know what you said earlier, but this is not clear to me because I don't think anybody should be conducting any city business on any personal email account. But I know what this says here. It says, contained therein to any non-city email is prohibited unless it is being done. I just want to make sure that does not, how can we craft that so that it means I can't take my email and send it to my Gmail account and then conduct city business? Is that language clear to you that can't be done in that sentence?
It's, if you read it in conjunction with other provisions within the policy.
Sure.
I believe that it does.
Okay. If everybody else agrees that is, it wasn't clear to me, so. just want to make sure that no person is forwarding city business to their own personal email ever. Regardless if they think that doing through their personal email is allowed to then conduct official business, because that's not allowed at all in the previous clauses, as you mentioned. But I just want to make sure that that doesn't occur. Because one could argue that you can already say, well, I'm a citizen of the city and this is important to me, so I'm going to send it to myself. But that shouldn't be allowed in the official role that you are in capacity of a city council member or a city employee. But, I mean, is it clear that that's not what that's not allowed?
Is it expressly stated? No. I would agree with you that it is not expressly stated.
That's the only area I want just clarification, because then I think we can move forward and then hopefully get this to city council.
So you're asking city attorney to...
Well, can we wordsmith it now, approve it to go to council? If there's agreement on the group tonight?
I think that can be provided in the direction, the motion. So I've got Councilmember Gross and then Bertolino.
So I guess, John, my question would be is, I get an email at city address, I forward it to my personal address, type out something on a regular computer, and then I send it back to my city address, and then I forward it to the resident. I'm doing it for convenience. I don't, typing on the iPad, and it's just not as fun as typing on the computer. So, I mean, you're saying, Ken, that would be prohibited?
Because you could do your email on your computer on webmail.
Yeah, I mean, it's a website now, so you can just log into it.
Right. If you don't like to type on this.
So I could go to the,
You can just go to like Office
Yeah.
360 and just, as long as you know your logins, just log into it
Yeah.
on anything.
Yeah. So you'll never have to do that again if you don't want to, because you can just do it from your own computer.
Yeah.
Just on the internet.
well, if I can get there,
Yeah.
Send you a link.
I guess I have a password?
Yep.
Okay. No, that's fine,
Yeah.
then, I just.
Perfect.
And then the other question I have, a violation of this policy, is the violation determined by city council? Who determines the violation?
This would be an administrative policy, so it would be more of an administrative determination.
So Sam?
Sam, yeah, primarily.
I would just want to make sure that that's clear as to who determines the violation.
I mean, we can clarify that, I think that's a good point, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Councilmember Bertolino.
Yeah, Ken, to your comments, I'm comfortable with the language and not stopping it at, you suggested, a period after prohibited, in that the crux here is official business. What is official business? And that was really the start of all this, was someone obtaining the information on the emails for using it for other than official business. So I think we've captured here, and it comes down to, it's always going to come down to a question, is if someone says, oh, you shouldn't have sent that, the question is going to be, all right, let's discuss it in light of, is it official business or not? So I think that's necessary. I think that phrase, official business, is really necessary for me anyway, to make it clear.
Okay, is there a motion for, Dr. Reddy, do you want to make that motion then to make that go to committee, council? I think you had mentioned before.
Well, I guess but everything we're doing with our city email is supposed to be official business regardless. So isn't that implied already? The key is that you can't forward it to your own private email at all, even if you thought that sending it to your private personal email, you could still then conduct official business. That shouldn't be allowed. Everything should be transparent and out in the open is what I'm saying, and so.
I think that was expressly said somewhere in the beginning, that all business should be on. I read it somewhere.
Official business use only.
So as long as there's an understanding that you cannot conduct any city business with your own personal email, Can you just refresh me where that is then, exactly?
It does not say that.
It does not.
Not
That's the key, I think, crux is what I think we're getting at, is that you cannot conduct any city business from your own personal email.
And if you look at, if you look at number 4, it's personal use, so it's, I guess, personal use of the city email is permitted on a de minimis basis only in a manner that does not supersede or contradict this policy. I mean, yeah, it's kind of like, to me, a little of this seems like, sort of like a circular firing squad.
Joe?
I've got, let's see, Councilmember Stevens, you had your hand up. Think you want to speak?
Sure. Who decides what is official city business and what is sunshine law? You know, what is required to make a sunshine law request?
Let me go back on, to answer your question, I think it goes back to the question that you had initially asked about who enforces that. And we do have in here, and I apologize for forgetting this, but in the last paragraph, it says that penalties as deemed appropriate by the city council under the circumstances. So there's some implication, at least, that the city council has a role in levying penalties on this. Now, in terms of what is or is not official business, it's whether or not it falls within the scope of the definition of official business, and that's going to have to be determined on a case-by-case basis. Now, again, remember that there's also express prohibitions on campaign activity, fundraising activity, things of that nature. So and those are very specifically defined. So what we're trying to capture here, I believe, is that gray area.
Right.
Councilmember,
I'm sorry, just a follow-up real quick though, but who decides on the case-by-case basis? Who's making the decision on that?
Well, and I think that part of it goes back to the question that was asked, is who enforces this policy, and that'll be whoever is determined to have the role of enforcing this policy. And right now, the only
I mean, wouldn't it be
party
the
that
city
has-
council would have to enforce the
It
policy
doesn't
in
have
the
to be
end,
the city
right?
council, no. It can be city administrator, it can be,
So the city administrator can just take away someone's email account?
absolutely. If the city council delegates that authority, certainly.
So-
I had Councilmember Bertolino and Councilmember Palmer.
I like the language change, John. I think for me, anyway, it covers the discussion we had before. To bring it to a vote, I'd like to go ahead and make a motion that we accept the language as written and forward it to the council for consideration.
So we have a motion made by Councilmember Bertolino. Is there a second?
I'll second.
So do you want to repeat again the motion? Did you get that clearly?
I mean, you say except as written,
Mhm.
but we're going to have discussion still.
Yeah, you have a discussion on the motion as far as acceptance is clearly. So I had Councilmember Farmer before the motion was made, and then I see Councilmember Edens. Do you want to speak on the motion?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of on the motion. I mean, I'm wondering if, in this, we have prohibited uses, and above it, it's saying that the city email address should only be used for city business. If you put in personal use as a prohibited use, doesn't that kind of cancel a lot of this stuff out? I mean, I don't even know why somebody would be doing any personal business on a city email address. I don't even understand how it would happen.
Or the opposite, city business on a personal email.
Right, I mean, it does, like, granted, I'm kind of new, but the only things I get are like messages from you guys and citizens out, for whatever. So I'm wondering if you just put, it doesn't prohibit, it doesn't appear in here to say, like, it says personal use is permitted, as long as it doesn't contradict with the idea that it is not in a campaign, fundraising, commercial or promotional purpose. I don't know what else it would be for. I mean, it's not like honestly, I don't know what it would be. So, I mean, I would just say, it's prohibited for personal use, because that's not what they're designed to do. It's just designed to convey city business stuff.
Anyway, I'm happy to do with whatever the council wishes. My intent in having that limitation, is consistent with other policies I've seen. And I think the idea there is that, so it's not overly draconian.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, and it may be, I'm
Yeah.
okay either
When
way.
attached
Because-
news
well,
article,
it's-
somewhat relevant, we could do that.
Yeah, well, I think it's rare. I don't want to be in a situation where, someone's family member sends them an email and receives one, and well,
Sure.
technically that's just been used for personal
Right.
use. And to kick someone off because of that is, I think, a little bit overreaching. That's kind of the idea.
All right.
Now, I will say in terms of the restriction of using personal email for public business, I think that is outside the scope of this policy. This policy is intended to address what the city has control over.
Sure.
And the city doesn't have control over your personal email address. And that's, because
You're right. Yeah, can I talk on that?
I have Councilmember Edens, and then I can be John Lewis.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so if we can't control it, the implication by defining what city email should be used for, we're already saying if there's city business, you need to do it on city email. It sounds like it's the best we can do. Is that correct, then?
right, well, I mean, what
Yeah.
we're saying is that that's what the purpose of this email is.
Right, so by default, if we're telling you that all business should be done on city email so that it's in the public sphere, the opposite is that none of it should occur on personal. So maybe if we can't state that, we've already kind of done an okay job and hit it from another direction. I thought were we not going to add a statement about Sam being in charge of investigation or the consequences before we motion to
can.
approve?
I think no, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the motion was simply to insert the language as presented, not for adoption of the whole as.
I thought it was
Correct me
to
if
send
I'm
to
wrong.
council for adoption.
Yeah.
That was the
Oh, okay.
motion.
I was saying.
Right.
yeah.
So
Understood.
before we did that, I thought we were already going to add language about what those consequences would look like. So should we do that now then?
I mean, amend the motion.
Yes.
An amendment to the motion in that capacity would be appropriate, yes.
And will this save us the headache of when something happens, no procedure for enforcement or investigation? I mean, is this gonna help smooth the path?
I think.
Because we're
To
missing it,
clarify
correct?
that
Okay.
issue, I think you're absolutely right.
Okay.
That whoever the committee decides as a recommendation, whether it be the city council or the city administrator or whoever you would like to have do that, yes, I think clarification on that is appropriate.
So my thought process is I would lean towards our city administrator, because there's no politics involved with elections or friends with so-and-so or feeling guilty or, you know, we can, once Sam, Mr. Anselm does an investigation or comes forward with a recommendation, and we can either support that or vote against that as a council. But we're not pulling something out of the air arbitrarily about how it's enforced for different people. It's I think, giving a business or professional the ability to review it per situation with different severity, with different circumstances. So that's what I'm leaning towards. I don't know how you feel about that. I think, yeah. So I guess I'll offer an amendment to add language clarifying that it goes to our city administrator first, and then do you think it would be appropriate for his recommendations to come to council, or just leave it with the city administrator? From an attorney's view.
However you all would like to do it. I mean, one obviously is a little bit more public than the other, in that you're gonna have open debate.
Yeah, I don't think you want that. I mean,
I want it to be as transparent as possible, but as non-politically motivated as possible. And it seems like both options have a little bit of a negative to it. So what I'll do is I'll just have my amendment stand as just going to the city administrator unless the committee thinks I'm wrong or the council thinks I'm wrong. So I'm not overly committed one way or another, but
So you make an amendment to the motion.
just for John to add that language,
Okay,
yeah.
and Carly, do you have that?
For the language to be revised to include that, yes.
Yeah. And then I need a second on that, so Councilmember Farmer. So now we have discussion on the amendment, and I do have several names. So if you already raised your hand to speak on the amendment, if not, all right, all those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? All right, that amendment passes back to the original motion now. So Councilmember Remy.
Yeah, so I understand what you're saying, Councilman Eaton's, on this, and I understand the city's attorney's comment on this, and you're absolutely right. We cannot be in the business, because we just don't have the jurisdiction to be able to police personal email for people that are actually using personal email to conduct city business. But we are in the business of being able to stop anyone from actually forwarding from their city email to a personal account.
Which is what that says.
It doesn't really though, because it says it's allowed if you're being in conjunction with official business. So how can this play out? I can send it to my personal email and then conduct city business on my personal email then. And I think that that's my problem. I came from a government agency where you couldn't do this at all.
Right.
At all. There was no way to do this at all. And I think that, and once it goes to a personal email account, you can't put forth a sunshine request. You lose all transparency. So just get rid of it and say you can't forward it to any personal email and just be done with it and let everything be done through city email. That's it. I believe that that's the most transparent way to do this. Because that's what, I mean, that would allow the citizens to hold us accountable. You can't get held accountable if you're forwarding it to your personal email and then trying to conduct city business behind the light of day. And I don't like that approach. So that's number one. Number two, on records retention, there's a sentence at the very end of number 2 that says a copy of any mass communication sent using a third-party marketing service that relates to official business shall be concurrently emailed to the city clerk in the same format. And I also don't think that certainly any elected official should be using a third-party marketing service to conduct any official business. That's the purview of only the city employees. And so I would like, I'm going to make an amendment when, at this point, and I'd like to deal with my other question as well, but we can deal with these sequentially, that mass communications should, but using any third-party marketing service for official business, should only be performed by city employees, not elected officials. It's not our place to do that.
You make a motion on
I will make that motion.
Okay, so it's an amendment?
That's an amendment.
And you're doing one item at a time?
I'm doing that one first, yeah.
Okay, so you have a maker of the motion, Carla. You have got that? Okay. Is there a second on that motion? Made by Councilmember Gross, so discussion on the motion now.
Yeah, I just wanted John to clarify first why it was worded the way it was worded in case.
And forgive me, but I'm confused on what we're amending.
Number 2, public records and records retention. End of that, a copy of any mass communications sent using a third-party marketing service that relates to official business shall be concurrently emailed to the city clerk in the same format. The way that I read that is, hey, I have 4,000 emails that now I can send from my city council email through MailChimp or whatever program you like to use, Blue or anything else, that's sending out official business and giving everybody updates, and I will also CC on that our city clerk. I don't think that that's what city council or elected officials should be doing in my purview. I think that's an employee job, frankly, because I think it opens Pandora's box for potential misuse, frankly, to our citizens.
Just, and again, just to be clear on what that language is intended to be.
Sure.
And I'm not,
Yep.
in our definition of mass communication, we include therein the use of a third-party service provider when you identify your city email as the sender of the communication, or it's associated with it. And that's what that is intended to capture is, if you send that mass communication consistent with our rules, which means someone has to be a subscriber to your email, which is also part of it, if you use that service to send it to subscribers, you have to copy the city clerk. The idea being that's how we capture for record retention purposes.
Oh, I completely understand why that is. I guess I'm actually saying that I don't think that city elected officials should be using third-party services for official business.
And I understand. I just want to make sure that the language there wasn't intended to be permissive.
Yeah.
It was more of a, make sure that if you do use that, please
I totally
copy it so we
understand.
understand it.
All All right, so Councilman, we have this amendment now on the floor, so
Yeah.
Councilman Farmer?
I mean, my question, and maybe this is, John, for you, so like at my work, we send out mass emails, but my individual people can't send them out. They have to go through approval from me to do that. Can we do something like I'm with, Councilman Remy on this, like, it shouldn't just be, people can do what they want. If I want to do that, and I go to Sam or whomever and say, hey, guys, I'd like to do this, is this possible? It gives the city the ability to say, like, no, or yes, we are going to, but it has to go through somewhat of a vetting process.
To the extent that mass communication would identify with your city email, yes, we can require that process. If you use a private email, we cannot.
Right.
Okay. So I mean, is this intended then to be just dealing with if I'm sending out I don't know, like a Ward 4 bulletin or something? Is this in place then for me to have to copy the city in on that if it's coming out from just me, not my city email address or whatever?
Only your city email address.
Okay, so,
Because remember, you're not supposed to be doing official business from your personal email anyway.
right,
It's a whole different conversation, I think, but yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Any discussion on the
I
amendment?
have a question.
But I'm okay with that
With
process.
third-party marketing
That's why we put it in
service,
place.
so for committees, a lot of times we'll use like SurveyMonkey or a Doodle to get meeting times. That's a lot of times a mass communication, and that's technically a third-party service. But I don't know if it's a marketing, it's not like MailChimp. So I'm almost wondering if, because we do that to conduct city business, that we should leave this in here and just not go down that rabbit hole on the amendment.
All right, Councilman Run.
SurveyMonkey, you have to click a link to get to those surveys.
Right. Oh, so you're saying because it's
You have
not
to take an
sent
action.
from
You have to take an
that,
action to get to it, yeah.
but then if you take action, is it not implied?
If
to
you're,
be an
but it's
appropriate?
inviting you to take an action, you're not required to do it.
Right. Right, like you have a QR code or you've got to press a link or something to go to it.
Right, but but if you're sending it out to members of the committee, then you are requiring and expecting action.
No, because it's not, you're not using a third part, you're not actually using the third-party
Third
marketing
party to
service to
send
contact
it,
it.
you're just using it
Right,
to.
To
okay.
service
Should be
the,
doing that.
Right, but I actually like council member, what's your name again? You're new on this council, right? Farm, you're not that new, actually, you know that, you can't use that all year
but I
long.
keep using it, just wait.
I like his idea. I mean, I would be okay for official business in that capacity to go through some sort of vetting process, not to give Mr. Anselm more work, but that's not unreasonable. I think that's okay.
I wish Joe were here, but I know, I believe council members have asked for items to be included in the e-news update. We have no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
So that process already.
I mean, at our
That's
office,
reasonable.
we just keep, we have a list of, I don't know,
Yeah.
millions of email addresses, I would imagine. And we just say, these are the people, this is the sections that they ask us what we'd like to do. We make sure that that's
Yeah.
an appropriate use and we send it.
Don't have an issue.
All right, so Carla, you have the motion on the floor?
It needs a second still.
Oh, okay, so we need to get a second on that, Councilmember. I
Go
thought
ahead.
we had a.
No, I was gonna say,
No,
I
Councilmember
forgot.
Gross seconded that motion before, I thought.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, on that one? I'm sorry, I didn't see.
Yeah.
I just have one more question, but I think Dave's first.
Repeat the motion, please. Ken, I'm just sorry.
No problem.
I got lost in a couple turns there.
This amendment is that mass communication using third-party marketing services may be done only by city staff. And then I referenced the actual E2 last sentence.
And that is when you're using your official capacity.
Correct.
Your official
Yeah.
city email.
Can't touch personally.
If I may, Ken, is that what we're saying, you're changing that last sentence to say a copy of any mass media using a third-party marketing service that relates to official business, instead of saying shall be concurrently emailed, it's just shall be something in the purview of
city-
only of the
the
city
approval from the city.
administrator?
Yeah, I mean, virtually, yes. So the answer to your question is, what I'm saying is that you can forward things to these guys and they can send it out and they're already processed. I don't want me to be the one to send that. And that's actually the vetting process, because you'd actually send it to them to then disseminate. So as Carla read it, I think you read it exactly right, that it's only going to be done by city employees.
May I? Would your language then simply say, that last sentence, it says shall be, strike concurrently, just say shall be emailed to the city clerk for distribution in the same format?
No.
Or like city-approved distribution.
Carla, would you mind just reading it one more time?
Can I make a suggestion,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman? We have one motion of amendment on the floor, and now we're getting to a
Yep.
second motion on amendment, and we're going to deal with amendments and amendments.
Sure.
I think we should address the First Amendment first. And I apologize, I don't mean
Hmm?
to, but we should address the First Amendment, motion on an amendment first, and then we can do subsequent amendments after that.
Right, I think we did do the First Amendment.
Did we?
Yeah, we already passed it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I'm just asking Carla just to read it, because I think what you read is actually what
My
I
apologies.
intended, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, well, actually, I'm with John.
Yeah, we did a middle
I
one,
have
right?
the very first one on recommending the drafted policy, and after that was passed, it was amended to
No.
include.
We didn't pass
No,
that.
we
Yeah.
passed as an amendment.
We passed the amendment
Okay.
about adding the
We did,
language for
right.
Sam
Yeah,
to
or
be.
Sam.
And now there was a
Yeah.
new amendment. After this
And
is
then the
done,
second one is yours.
then we'd go back to the
My
original.
apologies.
No, you're fine.
And that's to include the language wherein mass communication using third-party marketing services may be done only by city staff, referencing section E2, last sentence.
That's the intent of my amendment.
Was everyone,
Yeah.
when they voted the last time, aware that that was for the amendment?
Right.
They were
Yes.
voting on
Yeah.
the amendment.
Correct.
So now we have another amendment,
Yes.
separate amendment,
Mhm.
and this is the one Carla just read.
Yes.
And you have a question?
Yes,
Okay.
but just because staff does it, which I agree with, doesn't mean that we don't have to have the language about the city clerk retaining that.
Well, they would retain it if they send it anyways. They would be required.
But not necessarily, she has to be copied, and you know how they have us send it because it's easier for her to find it if she's copied regardless of whether or
you
not
would-
we send it? I was just
You would
wondering if
send
she
it.
has to be.
If the city's
copied.
sending it, she would just be a member of that list, and she would receive it no
Regardless.
matter
You'll
what.
never have to send it.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Is that right, Mr. Anson?
I believe so.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, if I could make a suggestion. One is, in terms of the procedure for getting I'm gonna call it a subscriber email, because that's what we're truly talking about. It
Mhm.
has to be subscriber to mass communication.
Mhm.
That process, I would suggest placing in D5 in lieu of E2. And I would keep the language in E2, because what I would suggest is, because if it's going from a third-party provider, I would prefer that the email be retained in the format in which it's being sent. While I understand that they're gonna have the substance of the message,
Mhm.
the actual email itself should be copied on the city system.
That's what I was trying to.
Right, because if it's going through a third-party provider, it's not gonna be on the city system.
But if the city, whoever, the city clerk, city administrator, is automatically added to every list, they'll receive it.
Right, and that's what I'm saying,
Okay.
if we keep this, that'll happen.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Just means that we won't be able to send it out, which is what we were, the intent did this all.
Correct.
I'm okay with that modification. I'd amend my amendment for that reason.
Okay, so switch it to D5.
Yes. Okay, so you are the maker of the motion,
Yep.
and your amendment, you're gonna modify your amendment, and then the second, are you okay with that
Yes.
modification? So if there aren't any objections, then we have that there, and we have that amendment. Any other comments? Okay, so now, with the amendment that we have, and Carla, could you read that?
To amend the language to include mass communication using third-party marketing services may be done by city staff only. Reference of D.5.
Okay, so we have that amendment, so no further discussion on that. Will all those in favor say aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? All right, so that amendment passes. So now we're back to the original motion, which, Carla, do you have the original motion?
The very original motion is to recommend to City Council the draft of the email use policy.
So back to the-
As
Contains the amendments, right?
Mhm.
With the
Yeah, we'd
amendments.
include now with amendments.
So back to the list I had before, I have Councilmember Edens, Remy, Stevens, and Gross. Councilmember Edens?
Would it be appropriate to do what we've done in other committees, which would be for City Attorney Young to work on the language provided by email to the committee without clearing recommendations? The motion would proceed as in the vote of committee and go to council, just for one more eyeball look.
Well,
before it
given that
goes.
we have the two amendments that have been made,
Yeah,
what you're saying, I would say, is probably that it would proceed to council, but with the direction that the city attorney makes those modifications, so that when it goes to council, it includes those modifications.
but could you provide it to the committee ahead of time?
The committee would only receive it from an informational perspective. We would not be able to
Yes.
take any action on it. And everyone would get a copy of it anyway because they're going to see it in council.
Okay,
Right.
Yeah.
So everyone will get it, not,
okay, that's fine.
All right, so Councilmember Edens, so then Councilmember Remy.
You know, I'm still stuck on 9, but I think, you know, we can debate this one when we get to council and work session. I'm okay with that. I still think I think it's this language of still the whole potential for people to forward to a personal email. That bothers me, but I'm happy to politely debate this in front of the entire council. So I'm okay.
Councilmember Stevens.
So, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but the city owns the data, right? The electronic communication, but they don't own the information contained therein, right? That's public information. So any email that a city council member receives, if they read it and they know the information that is in there, they can do whatever they want with it, correct? I mean, the city doesn't own the rights to the words, they own the email itself, like, and the data, right?
I'm not sure I'm
Intellectual
following.
property.
Okay, so if I get a city email that gives out information about an ordinance, you know, and I want to go use that information that I received in that city email for whatever purposes I want, that is public information. So I just don't understand how you're going to give one person, a city administrator, how are they ever going to delineate and how are they ever going to know whether it's official business, city business? How are they ever going to determine, you know, how are they ever going to prove that the email was used for personal business, you know? Because the words on the email, nobody owns those. That's public information for everybody, is it not?
Well, it depends obviously on the context of what's in the email, because there are certainly laws that prohibit the use of it for varying purposes, whether it's public or not.
Like closed session information, obviously.
Closed session or anything that could result in a financial gain to an individual. So that it all depends upon what's in the email itself. And again, you know, the abstract of the information, is that something the city can say you can't use? No, I would agree with that statement. Now, that being said, does that mean you can forward that information from the city email directly? No, but
Yes,
can you?
because you own the email itself, the
Right.
city does, but they don't own the information therein. So somebody could take a picture, they could do a screenshot of it, right? I mean, what's the difference?
Well-
If they remember it, if they write it down, if they print it out, you know, what, like,
The
Very on the weeds here.
the way the policy reads, it's not just forwarding, but it's copying the data or information in that email without requesting it for a sunshine law request. Again, the idea being that you can't transition something that you receive in your official capacity for personal purposes without going through the same process as everyone
and
else.
who decides whether it's that it should be a sunshine law request or not?
Well, and right now, the way per the amendment that was made, it's that the enforcement of the way I've got it drafted right now, consistent with the direction I've received, is enforcement of this policy shall be the responsibility of the city administrator.
And that could present a problem, and nothing against Sam, but, you know, are you gonna require an investigation? Are you gonna require a report to council? You know, and to say that it keeps politics out of it, if you remember, just a couple years ago, the city administrator was posting things on Facebook calling residents a group of dissidents. And that was very political. And so to say that the city administrators can't get political it's already happened. And so to put that all on one person rather than having the council decide, it's questionable. And not questioning you personally or anything like that, but I'm just saying, like, it should really be a vote of council if you're gonna take somebody's email account away, because what is the process that's going to be used? I just think it's way too far in the weeds. I think that you're making up a lot of new rules that open up for a lot of more questions than it does answers, so, just my opinion.
Councilmember Gross, I have you up next on the list.
Well, I guess whatever the email policy is, I mean, the violation goes down. I think you gotta try to keep it simple, and I would support Sam just making a decision on it, and then the violation continues on, saying, and any other recommendations by city council. And a recommendation by city council could be, no, it's not. So I would just say, keep it simple. I mean, and let's hope the situation does not arise. It's not a common occurrence, I don't think.
All right, with that then, I don't have anyone else on the list, so we have that original motion. Carla, does everyone understand the motion, or would you like it reread?
I do, but I would just offer, you know, a comment too, is that there is information that is publicly available that common sense dictates that you can send out that doesn't involve email transfer. So if you go to a meeting and there's an update, you know, we have updates on road construction. That's publicly available information that's verbally communicated on Livestream. Nothing wrong with typing that up and sending that out. So there's lots of ways that you can already send information to your residents without us just, you know, forwarding emails all the time to our personal account, because that's already out there, and they don't have to sunshine request it. It's already communicated by the city, or it's already in their newsletter. So just to be helpful, I'm just trying to be helpful.
Councilmember Renton.
I totally agree with you, and I think that that should always be done official capacity only as your position as city council member. Because that's what we're here for. That's it.
Councilmember Stevens, did you hand it?
Yeah, and just to, you know, for your point there, Lauren, it is all public information, and so how is Sam ever going to determine whether or not it was public information that you're using or it was an email that you were using? You know, he can decide to take away somebody's email account if he says that you used that email, even though you got the information from somewhere else, because it's all public information.
Well,
So
not-
it's worrisome.
Councilmember Renton.
I have one more question for the attorney. There's no tail coverage on this, and what I mean by that is, if you are the outgoing mayor or the outgoing city council member, and you forward information from your official capacity that could be even closed session information, what's our recourse? Because I do want to touch upon this if we bring this to council, because I want to make sure we have a true penalty for this.
Yeah, and that is problematic, and I understand where you're coming from, and I don't have a good answer for you on that. Obviously, there are ordinances that make it a crime
Right.
or an ordinance violation to, while in office, use information you receive that's confidential for personal gain.
Mhm.
And if you do that while in office and then leave office, it's still a violation.
Right.
Because you did it while you were in office, even if it's the last day. Now, have I ever seen that actually enforced and prosecuted?
But is that language you think we should have here?
No.
Or is that
We've
language
got
that's-
ordinances that cover that
cover
type of
this?
scenario.
Perfect. That's what I want to make sure.
All right. With that, then, we have that motion still on the floor. Does anyone need it to be read?
Nope.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Motion passes. Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda. And we've got, I believe, several guests here that are waiting on the public works items. So hopefully this next one should be quickly, because it is just an approval of the 2021 budget schedule. So let the city administrator speak to that.
Chairperson, and
With respect to Councilmember Bertolino's request, we have been working on proposed changes to our budget schedule anyway. Key differences between what our current process is and what you have in front of you. Currently, or if we use the same process we used last year, the budget process doesn't really start until September 14th. Under the proposed schedule, it'll actually start on August 10th, so it gives us about a month ahead time. And the process starts with a discussion with the full council, as outlined in the table there. We're going to review strategic goals and objectives. We're going to talk about any budget issues that we see with regard to financial trends, revenues, maybe coming in forecast or over forecast, et cetera. The second main difference, second change, the preliminary budget, once we've gone through the review at staff, currently would go to council on October 12th. Under the proposed schedule in front of you, that would actually go to council on September 28th. And then we would have 3 council work sessions scheduled on October 12th, October 26th, and if needed, November 9th, to discuss the budget in front of the full council. And then from there on out, it just is really dates that are set by ordinance and charters.
Questions? I've got Councilmember Remy, Bertolino, Stevens.
I'll yield to Councilmember Bertolini because I'm going to make a motion just to support as is.
Okay, yeah, thank you. The only question I had, thank you for saying for doing this.
So let me pause for a second. Was that a motion that you
Well, I'm going to let him talk first because if I make a motion to go forward, someone's going to second, and then he won't be able to talk on this. If he's going to change, you know.
Just a comment that my feeling was that what was missing from this year's and previous years' discussions about budget was the very detailed looking at each line item, basically, and making decisions like we kind of made at the end, like should we put this money here or there. And do you think that this process will give us that kind of in-depth, deep dive into the line items?
I think it will. I think if you look at, particularly the second council work session that we have scheduled for October 26th, that's when we're going to talk. Now, we're limited for an hour essentially before the regular meeting starts, but that doesn't prevent the council from adjourning the work session, having the regular meeting, and then resuming the work session after the regular.
My comment was going to be, Sam, is in maybe consideration of the committee was, should there be a special council meeting sometime in September or early October that is dedicated solely to the discussion of the budget, that it isn't sandwiched into a work session or a general session. It is solely for the purpose of going through the budgets and line items. That's what I was going to throw up, Sam, was that take it out of the course of normal schedules and say, this one date, we're going to really deep dive into the issues, and it's separate. We don't have to worry about any other agenda items or anything else. This is what we're going to work on.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, because I know Sam said, October it would get before the full council, so maybe we can ask Sam for his opinion on that, if that would make sense, and then if the committee wishes to make that suggestion.
I'm open to whatever the council would recommend. Understanding and being respectful of other meetings that you have during the course of the week. Be respectful of your time. I know for certain we've got this amount of time blocked off and it's already on your schedules, but if we need to have a special work session or a budget work session, I've done that in other cities and that would not be uncommon.
I think that would help, some of the folks that may have had issues or not seeing the budget until the very end. At least this will make sure that it gets in front of them and they have a chance to review it, and they can't later on come in with an excuse that they haven't looked at it or something.
Can I make that as a recommendation, as an addition to the schedule that we have?
Yeah, do you want to make the motion?
I'd like to make that motion. Yeah.
Okay, so make, Carla, Councilmember Bertolino is going to make the motion, and so he's going to make the motion for, let me make sure. You want to say it?
Go ahead.
No, that approving the schedule, but with an additional meeting of the full council in September to review the full budget details.
Good.
So we have a motion made, is there a second?
Just a point
Councilmember
of
Wright.
clarification. We are not scheduled to actually have the
Yeah, I think we wanted in October, right?
distribution of the draft budget until the end of September, so it
Yeah.
have to be in October.
Okay,
Yes.
so therefore with that information and logistically, it's not possible to do it before October. Will the maker and the second be okay with changing that September to October?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we have both in agreement, so now we have this motion on the floor again to approve the budget schedule, but with an additional meeting of the full council to review the full budget details in the month of October. All right, so Councilmember Emmy, I think you,
So I like the motion, I agree with it. One suggestion with this motion would be we make a request for October 19th P and Z meeting to be at 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock, and we have a 7 o'clock council meeting. You get it done the week before, and it'll just be on this.
So move October, the P and Z for October to 6 o'clock.
6
and
o'clock.
Start the budget work session at
7 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just want to make sure, the reason why I'm suggesting that date is just because I think there's going to be a lot of discussion. It's going to take a lot of time, and I don't want us to get to that December 14th meeting and be pressured to make decisions without having a full, comprehensive conversation about it.
okay, so we have that motion still on the floor. I had Bertolino, you obviously made the motion. Stevens, did you have anything else to say?
Yeah, what was the reasoning for, like, or is it still gonna go through each committee? 'Cause-
Yeah, I think each committee will do sort of their work. I envision, again, soon thereafter, once we distribute the information to council, once we have a preliminary budget, the next meeting of those committees would be dedicated to having a budget discussion.
Okay, and then also, how does that work in line with the event calendar? Because that was, obviously a discussion at the end of this last year. Is the event calendar gonna have to come out before? Does it come out after? Does it come out in conjunction? How's that gonna work?
Those conversations were held around October in the committee meetings, and the committees actually spent time looking at the detailed budget.
I think though that didn't the event calendar was approved like was it the last meeting in November, I
I think
think?
it was November.
Right, and then all of a sudden it was like the next meeting, it was the full budget, so how does the event calendar go square with those meetings?
So I think just like the way the budget goes to the committees, in advance of going to the full council, the committees then would also be reviewing the event calendar, but the final approval of the calendar will not occur until December, which is consistent with how we do the final approval of the budget.
In November though, right?
Is that-
The last meeting in November will be the event calendar, and then the one meeting in December will be the final budget. So you can still get, I guess there, still get some changes being made at the end there, right? But
Yeah, on the whole, I would like the event calendar to get out a little bit earlier than it did
Yeah.
this past year anyway, so
Right.
I think we're gonna work towards that aim of achieving that, so.
okay, and that's gonna be done in conjunction with the budget talks at committee in I guess, in October?
Ideally, we would have the event calendar for 2021 set before budget talks begin.
Okay.
Yeah, because how do you have
And
events?
then
you
be
gotta get,
part
like-
of the preliminary budget, so any particular events that need to be discussed as part of the budget process,
Right.
you would at least have the dates in front of you.
Right, and then you have a few more meetings at council still to bring it up, and then
Decide.
at the very end doing it. Okay.
You got it.
All right, I don't have anybody else on the list, but, Councilmember Brooks.
The council retreat,
Mm-hmm.
what do you expect that format to be? Time and,
So I've had a couple of thoughts on that. We could do a full day retreat, which I think last time we set the 2015 to 2020 goals, that was what was held. There was a separate day set aside. I've had conversations with the mayor. He wanted to know if we could do that over the course of a couple of work sessions, which I think could be feasible as well. But we might have to have 2 or 3 work sessions to come up with with a proposal. So, like, cities do it differently.
So you need 2 or 3 work sessions in order to arrive at like the approach?
The strategic goals and objectives.
So don't have,
I'm open to suggestions. I envisioned it originally as a dedicated day for council and staff to meet to talk about these things with a facilitator to facilitate that conversation and meeting with staff and perhaps council members prior to the date of that event to be able to identify, okay, what does staff think is important in terms of identifying the goals, what do council members think, marrying that information and then having a discussion about those results. I mean, you can pick a different facilitator and they're going to have a different recommendation on how to proceed with that.
now is the content of the budget, the detail that's in it, is a lot of that required by any particular Missouri state?
GFOA requires a lot of that information.
Okay, so you do need it to be an inch thick.
If you want to receive the Distinguished Budget Award every year, then you should stick with those guidelines. They're good guidelines. They're intended to be as transparent as possible to make sure that citizens understand the budget and how it came to be, what it does for them.
See, because I actually think the first item is the most important.
I tend to agree that that's going to set the stage for staff in terms of setting the budget for the next 5 years. That's going to be the primary driver.
Okay, Councilmember Palmer.
Just, is that council retreat the new council or the current council?
That was the discussion. In talking with Director Vunich, who was here last time, we wanted to wait until the new council was seated to be able to have that conversation. That's why the goals weren't really adopted until May, was because for that reason. I tend to agree. I think that's a good approach since we're heading essentially a couple months away from it.
Okay.
Councilmember Brennan.
I'd like to take the Band-Aid off as fast as possible. I don't like to take one half off and then wait a month to take the other half off. So I would rather just do it on one day. And I'd rather do it probably with the new councils coming in because it makes more sense. But that doesn't mean or negate the idea that you can invite the previous council members to hang out and give their insight and experience. I mean, I think that's an important thing to do. But I would have it a single day, single retreat day.
Another thing, I talked to that point, I talked with the mayor as well. I mean, there are opportunities and ways to get even citizen input into the process, either prior to that retreat or once the retreat is had and we kind of identify the goals, we can get feedback sort of post-event as well. So I think that's all easily accomplished.
All right, well, Sam, thanks for really bringing this to the table. Obviously you saw how the budget process was and came forward with these recommendations. So compliments to you and the rest of the team for doing this so that we can move up the review of the full budget to the council and get those details out in front of everyone. All right, well, we have that motion there.
I'll second it if we add something second.
I think we already had a first and a second. Carla, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, is everyone aware of the motion then? So there was a motion there and that component that Councilmember Bertolino mentioned about having that full meeting in October to review the details of the budget. So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? The motion passes. Great. Moving on then into Public Works, we have no further information items. The first for action item is number 1, the proposed Emerald Ash Borer Management Plan. Rick?
Thank you very much, Chair Giordano. Council members, you I'm sure hopefully recall this item has been before you previously. We are faced with a infestation of the emerald ash borer in the city of Wildwood, which will impact all of our ash trees. We have worked with Davie Resource Group and previously and hired them last year to do an inventory of all of our trees, and they came up with a number of just over 1,300 ash trees remaining on our public right-of-way in the city of Wildwood. You may recall in September they brought essentially 4 ideas, 4 strategies on how best to move forward, how to address the demise of those trees. They are back with us tonight. I believe based on the September meeting, the thought was to pulled together a strategy that included not just removal and replacement, but treatment of those trees. So that's what they're here tonight, is to present the strategy that would include those items. And Jacob was with us, I think, in September. You may recall Jacob at the meetings. And he's brought along Andy Berg as well tonight, and we'll let them present to you their PowerPoint.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rick, and thanks to the committee members for having us here this evening. Again, as Rick just mentioned, my name is Jacob McMains. This is my colleague, Andy Berg. And this presentation really evolved out of a lot of feedback that we received from you on September. Quick housekeeping item right here in the front end. Rick has been kind to provide this memorandum for you here too, so this has a little bit of a more thorough source of information. What we have here are just 13 slides. We'll try to breeze through them pretty quickly in the essence of time, although I really did enjoy hearing your robust conversation about email policy. But with that being said, we'll get started. Andy, if you didn't mind managing the slides for me, and then we'll swap out. So if you could go ahead and please advance here. So just a strategy overview again. This recommended strategy that we're giving here tonight really evolved out of a lot of the feedback that we heard from you all last September. So what came to the forefront of my mind was, first of all, this is a really engaged group. I was happy to see that evening. But also there was a concern about aesthetics. There was a conversation about massive removals in certain blocks, a conversation about equally distributing those removals. As Rick gave you the synopsis in his intro, there were 4 initial strategies that were presented, one of which was a do-nothing strategy, one of which was remove all, one of which was treat all, and there was a combination strategy. And that's really what we landed on. And a lot of that has to do with the specifics of your population here too. That being said, when I'm commenting on the specifics of your population, what's unique about the city's ash population is that you have a broad range of trees. The majority of your population falls in this maturing age class, size class, I would call it. They're trees that aren't mature and full-grown shade trees, but they're growing well. They look really well right now. For the most part, your population, based on all the observations we collected, is fairly healthy. So with that being said, it's also a little bit difficult for us to kind of make some determinations about where this combination of removal and treatment lies. And the quick synopsis I'll give you there is that usually when we're looking at our population, it's those outliers that are easy to make decisions on. The smaller size classes, it's easy to just go ahead and cut your loss because you know those removals are going to be cheaper and move on. And your mature trees usually have a larger gradient of maybe condition class or live crown ratio, something else that we looked at. But again, your population in general was very healthy. So some of those outliers on your far extremes weren't as easy to identify when most of your population kind of fell in that middle ground. So the synopsis of the removal and treatments just gives you some numbers here overall. What's going to be key with this strategy too is the fact that, again, the majority of your population falls into that healthy, doing pretty well, is annual monitoring as we go forward so we can continue to kind of reassess the population, try to prioritize the trees we feel are providing the most potential liability or risk, and make sure that we're prioritizing those with upcoming phases in terms of removals. If you could go ahead and advance, please, thank you.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
What's the difference between the green and the blue dot? Is
Okay,
one
so this
replace
is-
and one remove?
What screenshot of this map did you take? I think it's just a different historic layers. So this is the tree keeper system that we use to manage the population. And we have an old historic population and then an ash specific population. So I think the green is probably ash only.
The green is ash only.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
It has the ability to kind of color code things if you're doing individual queries in there. So that's why I wanted to verify with him. But yes, on this one it is ash. So here's just a synopsis of the strategy and some of the pros and cons of it, particularly the pros. So the great thing about this particular strategy is it gives you predictable, proactive effort. At the same time, it gives you some more budget flexibility. The fact that it's in phases, it allows you to preserve the most desirable population and kind of make individual selections on those trees that you're trying to preserve. Go ahead. I'm going to turn it over to Andy now. He's really going to talk about the criteria for these two specific types of
Yeah, I just want to discuss how these became more numbers. As you saw in the previous slide, we are deciding we're going to treat 394 trees total out of the 1,336 ash. It's 30% of the ash population we're going to retain. It's a pretty fair number. It's a very economical number. And the criteria we used was based on all the data collected in the inventory. Primarily, we want to look at that size class. Again, like Jacob had mentioned, all the smaller size classes, they're not as beneficial. They're cheaper to remove now. If you replace those trees, they can get back up to size quite quickly. Whereas the maturing stuff, is more beneficial, and it's tougher to do replacements and get those back up to size. So we basically decided to, of course, go by condition. Anything in poor condition or critical or dead obviously is going to be removed. So anything in fair or better condition is being retained. And with that also this percent live canopy. When the guys were out doing the inventories, they were getting condition ratings, which can be subjective based on who's collecting the data. But they also use this percent live canopy to make sure that they were, getting quality on data when it comes to condition. And what I looked at was keeping the stuff in the 15-inch to 24-inch diameter size class. That was the most economically really feasible size class to stay within. It also says number 3 there, 14-inch versus 15-inch minimum is financially significant. I looked at retaining the 14-inch size class as well, but that added like an additional $17,000 in treatments. So again, you gotta find your minimums and maximums. In treatments, this number will likely decrease over time as condition ratings decrease. If you're doing like sidewalk repairs, you're damaging trees through those endeavors, obviously there's no point in treating those trees, you just go ahead and remove them. The removal criteria, basically anything that we decided we were going to treat, everything else is being removed. So it could be in any condition really based on size. We can have stuff in the 15-inch and 24-inch size class, but if it's in poor condition, obviously that was going to go. So it's targeting the smaller stuff and the stuff larger than 24-inch. And this number is likely going to increase over time as condition ratings decrease. So now this is actually outlined also in your guys' memorandum, but this was changed last second. Rick had asked that we put in some replacement costs in as well. So that total number you see on top, $150,000, is consistent with this 5-year plan we provided. The $100,000 is just for emerald ash borer management alone, treatment and removals. $50,000 is replacement. So for treatments, you will see this in parentheses phase 1. We're going to split treatments into 2 different phases. Treatments are good for 2 years. The trees are injected, and that treatment is good for 2 years. And again, we have 394 trees we're going to treat. It's more economically feasible and more practical in the field for us to split those numbers in half. Treat half the population 1 year and the other half the next year. And we'll just leapfrog those phases. So year 1, we'll treat 200 trees. We'll come in and do removals. The first batch of removals will focus on those that are in the worst condition. Those that are in bad condition can have higher risk ratings. They start to fail and become a problem, so we want to get rid of those first. So with the removals, we'll be removing about 120 trees at approximately 72 grand. So and that's where we get that $100,000, and that other 50 is going to be our replacement, in which I'm confident we can replace all that we remove with the $50,000 budget. Again, this TRIM grant that MDC offers, they offer a grant up to $25,000, and that can be, they do not allow us to use those funds for treatments of ash, but we can use them for removals and certainly planting. And having this combination approach and this management plan is really going to help us big time for submitting this application and being funded. So we'll shoot for that type of funding for the replacement endeavors. Year 2, this is all going to look very similar. Again, $150,000 with treatments. We're moving on to phase 2 with the remaining 194 ash trees. Again, we're removing approximately 120 trees at approximately $72,000. And then in this year 2, we need to start doing some monitoring, which is when we're going to come through and monitor the remaining population, adjust numbers as we see fit. We may take some off the treatment slate and say we're going to remove them instead. They might not be worth it anymore. So we just need to come through annually and monitor, as well as monitor our replacement trees. Again, as Jacob moves back in, by year 3, we're back to phase 1 of treatments. And again, we're going with the removals. This removal number, the number of trees is based on the price of removing trees in different size classes. And again, it's all dependent upon, you know, the city budget, which Rick provided us some information for. So with that, with the 900 and something trees that need to be removed, you're looking at about 8 years to have all the trees removed. I don't think we mentioned this yet, but everything above 24 inches, we're not gonna remove the first year. Actually, Jacob will get into that here in a second.
You're fine. Go ahead.
So moving on, again, year 5, it's the same, and all the way to year 8. Treatments will have to continue on past, you know, when the trees are removed. As the emerald ash borer population peaks, destroys everything that's not treated, eventually the population starts to cease a little bit and chills out. Research shows that those treatments can actually be expanded beyond the 2-year mark. So once we get over that hump, we can treat our remaining population and start, you know, distancing that gap of treatments. But that's years down the road. So replacement trees, again, ideally replacements would occur on an annual basis, ideally in fall after our removal efforts. This is going to look good publicly and keep your guys, you know, canopy cover sustainable. Again, I had mentioned this, possibly this fall, we can look at planting efforts and utilizing trim grant funding. I think there's a good shot of getting, you know, some good financial assistance through the state with your new plan. And again, I had mentioned this $50,000 budget is going to likely replace all that is removed per phase. And again, we looked at about approximately 120 trees removed per year. That could be, if we're going to the bigger size class, it could be closer to 100 trees in a year. When we get to the smaller size class, we could be getting closer to 200 trees per year. So it's all going to depend. We're going to have to take it year by year. This one's always a little harder for people to swallow, but I do recommend when we do replacement trees that we use smaller containerized nursery stock rather than putting in the larger bulb and burlap. You know, people want instant large trees, but I'm not sure what the city's capacity is as far as maintenance goes, but you can't simply slap a tree in the ground and just let it ride. You need to protect your investment with maintenance. With your guys' shallow bedrock soils and real clayey soils and these newer developments, using this smaller stuff is you're going to have a better success rate. It's cheaper in the long run also, so you can plant more. And then, as you can see with everything that's going on with the ash trees, we're going to go with good species diversity, plant a lot of different stuff, so when the next, you know, rain comes in of an epidemic, we won't have this big of a problem. Question?
I just wanted to make sure that when we budgeted for replacement, we weren't using, you know, groups of trees like the Calorie Pear family and things like that we were staying away from.
Absolutely not, yeah.
Thank you.
We'll develop these specs when the time comes, but we'll make sure that we're well below a certain threshold of percentage. We will not just throw in 3 species, you know, hundreds of trees of 3 different species. We'll really broaden that horizon. We will not be using any Calorie Pear. Yes, sir.
Are there specific replacement trees that, in the locations that you would place, that would be taken into consideration for floodplain problems, drainage problems, areas by our creeks and things like that, that would be
Absolutely.
approved? Okay.
Absolutely. And again, we could specify that stuff as we get into it. We'll look more into inventory data, see where trees are coming out. And as we're auditing the work being done, we'll take all of that stuff into consideration. Yes.
Okay. You mentioned the public pricing for treatment removals of ash on their property. Meaning, we talked about this, could a citizen come up to you and say, hey, you're cutting all the trees, I got one in my backyard, what kind of a deal can you give me?
So that, and I appreciate you already asking that question. So that kind of arrangement is going to be hard for a contractor to honor with the private citizen. And here's the reason for that. We're talking about trees that are in defined tree lawns or parkways, whatever you want to call it. I'm talking about the space between the sidewalk and the curb for that right-of-way section. So we're talking about trees that are predominantly going to be removed by a bucket truck. When we're talking about a tree in private property, then you may be talking about a tree that a climber has to get up in, and that's an additional incurred cost to the tree service. So sticking language like that in the RFP that we're putting together that says you need to honor these same rates with citizens, companies aren't going to be receptive to that. But here's, I think, where we can meet them halfway. When it comes to treatment specifics, and they're usually going off a diameter class that equates to a certain cost per tree, that's something that they could honor. Because we're talking about different equipment, just tugging a handheld unit back into the backyard to treat the tree, so it doesn't really make a difference if it's on the curb or in the backyard.
Thank you. If I could say one thing,
I kind of envision it, I mean, practically speaking, I think once they're out there in the neighborhood, those folks are gonna contact the contractor, and they're gonna work those deals out, and I suspect they'll get a pretty fair price, because they'll be mobilized, they'll be on that street working. So we will certainly encourage residents to do that, I think, and make it as easy as possible for them to take advantage of that contractor, and start working on the government.
That's a great point, Rick, and I'd agree 100%. So just based on their proximity in a certain region, because a lot of, from a tree service, a lot of their expense cost, and if they're providing you a bid to do a tree removal or prune or whatever, is really getting the truck from point A to point B, the rates for that crew, the fuel, the equipment usage. So if you think they're already in the neighborhood, they're probably going to be able to provide a little bit more competitive bids. But in terms of trying to honor it specifically with what the rates they're going to be providing the city to provide these, we can't really build that in.
What's, I'm new here, as I like to say.
No, you're good.
What's the average lifespan for an ash tree? I don't even know.
Just a healthy ash tree?
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess I'm wondering, like, if these trees last generally for 35 years, my assumption is, like, in my subdivision, that's all of them. And so they're already reaching the end of their lifespan, if that's what it is. And so I'm wondering, like, are we better served spending more money on removing trees and replacing them with something, as opposed to just sort of keep treating something for a couple of years and then have to remove it down the road anyways?
I think with your established trees, having the soil volume you do with the roots able to go under the sidewalk into the tree lawns, these trees can easily surpass 50 years.
Okay.
I mean, healthy trees in a forested setting, which is obviously optimum, they're gonna be well over 100 years, hundreds of years, depending on
What it is.
certain variables in the soil or whatever. But these trees, we've seen ash in similar soil situations, same soil volume, they've got the capacity to be large shade trees and be around for quite a long time, at which point they're gonna have high value.
Right.
So I think you get a lot of drawback if you went into these neighborhoods that have sizable trees already and remove them and replace them with essentially sticks, you're gonna have a lot of,
Yeah.
you know,
Upset
as you
people.
know, yeah.
But to speak to your instincts, your logic is on, whereas if you're thinking about just cutting your losses and removing and replace, on the front end, you're already working towards a healthier population a little sooner.
Right.
The problem with that is that you're incurring a lot of cost on the front end too. It's a little
Right.
harder to predict. The idea of that phased approach, in the long run, you may have a little bit more money as it's spread out, but it gives you more flexibility to make those decisions as the population changes, especially with this population where right now it looks, I mean, all of our data is telling us that it's fairly healthy, outside of the aesthetics of that
Right.
kind of clear-cut approach too.
Right.
Which was something that the committee brought to our concern last.
Yeah, I
year.
mean, I know they went down, it wasn't actually my neighborhood, but they did go down a good portion of our streets and clear cut a bunch of stuff, and people were like,
Oh, yeah.
seriously, what is happening?
Oh, yeah, you're gonna have some phone calls, yeah. So a couple feature considerations, really. We've already talked about the public pricing, we've talked about replacement opportunities. I think something else for the committee to consider, and this question doesn't really have to be answered, but there's an opportunity to do some outreach and education, particularly with homeowners that have these larger size class trees that we're omitting from this first phase, to potentially advocate for that tree and maybe, if they have some sort of connection, actually treat the tree on their own. These trees will also continue to be reassessed further down the road, but we're talking about our largest trees in the communities, the ones that are providing the most benefit. So you could couple that with an outreach campaign and also get some work done in the interim. But that isn't something we have to approach, it's just something that we wanted to suggest. And I think it is worth noting, I know I've already beat this dead horse a couple times tonight, but the long-term commitment that's key to this is going to be that annual monitoring, because as Andy pointed out, all the evidence tells us that these trees are going to continue to decline. Even if we're treating them, we're expanding their lifespan, we're allowing these trees to maybe not exhibit some of the signs and symptoms of the insect and show signs of decline as rapidly as they would, but these trees are going to continue to decline. It's just that we don't have, there's really no exact science. We have some metrics that tell us how quickly they're going to decline and even succumb to mortality at some point, but that annual monitoring is going to be consistent in that future decision making.
Point two with the outreach and education, which is important. A lot of towns are doing this, where you're gonna have people that love their street tree. It's not technically their tree, but they're in love with it. And once they find out theirs wasn't selected in our criteria and it's slated for removal, they're gonna be quite upset. So maybe allowing them to pay the contract price to have it treated is perhaps a good option. I don't think you'll get a lot of participation in that, but a handful isn't a bad thing. Yep.
The treatment, I mean, if the data shows that all the trees are gonna have to be replaced, removed and replaced within 10 years, isn't the treatment just throwing good money at bad trees for the next 10 years?
No, the 8-year phase is for removals. After 8 years, the trees that are slated for removal will be gone. The trees that we're treating are gonna continue to, live their lives.
So
He's mentioning annual monitoring and they're declining, but what we're gonna see is some are declining, but a lot of these trees that are, in the 15-inch size class are gonna continue to prosper for many, many, many years. But we need to monitor them to see if some do in fact, decrease in their health and longevity, then we'll take those off the treatment board. But no, a lot of these trees that are, they're middle-aged trees and they're gonna live, assuming everything else is going well with these treatments, they're gonna live for many years to come.
So we could still have ash trees 20 years from now?
Absolutely.
Sure.
A lot of these trees in the 15 to 24-inch size class are likely 40-year-old trees now, 30, 40-year-old trees. And they can easily do another 30, 40 years.
With or without the treatments?
With the treatments. Without the treatments, they're gonna be dead in 5.
Okay, and then, I
So
guess-
we're selecting 30% of that population of the best trees you have, which is why we're saying to treat those, because they're in good condition,
Okay.
essentially.
The science behind the chemicals is also continuing to evolve, and we're learning more. So we're learning that the efficacy of these treatments is actually significantly better than they originally anticipated. So you could make the argument that you could treat a tree in perpetuity for the remainder of its life and it won't ever succumb to EAB. But we don't know for certain if that's because the tree hasn't lived out the duration of its normal lifespan since we started these treatments at this point. The downside of that is that every 2 years you're paying to treat the tree.
Right.
So there's also that opportunity cost of, is it worth it to treat that tree into perpetuity, or is it worth it to replace it at this point, remove it and replace it at that point?
And then, I guess basically it's like right around $1,000 per tree to remove and replace is what I'm looking at here, right?
That's a mean cost, but that number really evolved out of looking at the spectrum of diameter classes. So we have some regional numbers based on size classes of some other similar IPs that we've involved in that we applied to that. But I'd say mean per tree is probably, that's fair to say.
Is that a normal price for, that seems high. I mean, for.
Again, that's mean. You're talking about a 40-inch diameter tree compared to like a 3-inch diameter tree, somewhere in the middle there, $1,000 for like a 15-inch diameter tree.
And like most of our trees are, 80% of them are 17 inches or less. So is that $1,000 per tree a normal, I don't know, is that?
Not for the smaller size classes, definitely not.
So you're saying $1,000 to remove and replace?
Yeah, so it's 70, I think you said $72,000 to remove, 50,000 to replace, 120 trees per year, 122,000, 120, right around $1,000. But I don't know, I've had trees cut down and replaced. It's like the new trees, especially if you're gonna replace them with the smaller diameter trees, like you said, I mean, those aren't real expensive, are they? Those are.
No, they're relatively inexpensive.
Right, so I was just wondering where the
We paid
$1,000
about,
per tree cost.
we paid about $400 on our contract last year to replace trees, just for the replacement of the trees that were planted.
And they're not big.
They're not big trees.
It's pretty standard.
Yeah.
So it's,
So the 1,000 includes the removal, the stump grinding, the restoration that goes into the, removing that tree and then replanting it. And that's just an average price. I mean, depends on the specific tree.
okay, yeah, just,
It's
it
expensive.
seemed a little high to me, so I was just questioning.
Well, and of course, we're gonna develop an RFP and get, a big variable amount. There's gonna be a lot of people participating in this, and we're gonna see the numbers, and they'll speak for themselves.
Okay.
We're gonna have really high bids, we're gonna have really low bids, and, we'll make that decision then.
Is that the map that you guys had up there earlier? I'm wondering if there's a way, or if it exists, I don't know if it does or doesn't, to, if we have a map like that of the city, obviously we can divide it up into subdivisions or whatever, because I think a lot of, I know in my subdivision, I'm certain that we have ash trees. I know I had some in my backyard that got sick, I cut them down, but it would be good to know where they're kind of clustered and when, because, you know, obviously the conversation will come down to where we're putting assets and what wards and things like that. But at the same time, if there are real genuine concentrations in places that maybe a subdivision needs to participate in something like this outside of what the city is doing, it would be really good and valuable to reach out to those people and say, hey, you guys have 600 of these trees, and oh, by the way, probably all of them are gonna be dead soon.
It's really simple for us in the tree keeper system to spit out an address listing, a location of these trees that are selected for removal and treatment, either or.
Okay.
And show graphic representation.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, I mean, I know for us, like, it's been a conversation for 3 years at our subdivision that, like, we know something's happening, we don't know what it will be or how much or how big. So if we can provide that to people, you know, obviously we'll take care of those things that are on the street, but there's,
I will say that,
I think is-
go ahead, Rick, I apologize. Go ahead.
Well, I'm getting off the subject, but personally, the concern I have a lot is the trees that are in people's front yards and backyards, that they're
Right.
not aware that the problem's coming, because
Mhm.
that is equally or maybe more
Yeah.
significant.
I mean, I have 2 very nice big trees that all of a sudden just died.
Yeah.
And I assume that's why, I don't know, but I'm not the only one. We've had a bunch, so people have asked. So yeah, if we can get a map like that and a list, that would be good.
We definitely took aesthetics and the location in the community into consideration this first time when we looked at how those removals will be distributed, knowing that was a concern for the committee last time we met. I will say, though, that moving forward in future phases, we'll still take a look at that, but I think what we need to prioritize is that potential liability and risk that some, as these trees are declining, that they pose, to try to mitigate that.
Yeah.
I've just said, so the goal tonight is, you know, we're gonna be preparing the RFP, but is it mainly to decide the extent of treatment versus replacement?
No, really, that's what my next bullet point, in terms of reconciliation, we're just looking for you to approve the direction that we're going. And then we'll be
But the
submitting.
bid package is gonna outline a replacement and a treatment program.
It will mirror what we presented here this evening for this first phase,
Okay.
yes.
Councilmember Rath.
I make a motion to allow the department to work with the gentleman to create a bid package, and we can evaluate this in March.
Okay, so you make a motion, seconded by Councilmember Gross. Any other discussion on the motion? Councilmember Stevens.
So Rick, I think in the budget for tree removal was like 70,000, but then the last 2 years it's been at 105 and 115,000. Was the last couple years, was part of that used for the emerald ash trees, or was that for other trees that need work in other parts of the city?
Well, in previous years, this year we did create a special budget item for Emerald Ash 4, and there's 75,000 set aside specifically for that. Now, we also have a budget for tree removal, which I think what we're proposing this year is to use some of the tree removal towards this project we want to pull together. So we have the 75 plus a little bit of the tree removal budget that would go into that $100,000 we were quoting as the number we want to spend for this year.
But I guess my question was like, for last year and the year before, was part of that 105,000 and the 115,000, was that used for Emerald Ash 4 as well?
It was used for, yes, for removals and then for replacements. We haven't done the treatment yet. This will be the first time we've set up a treatment project.
Okay.
And we had not explicitly broken out a line item for Emerald Ash 4, but going forward, that was kind of my thought. We would split it out and we can include the tree removals next year, so it's more clear exactly what we're spending on it, if that's the desire of the council.
Yeah, just like, last year, did we spend the 70,000, 75,000 on the Emerald Ash 4 plus the 115? So were we at 185 last year?
I'd have to double check the exact number. I don't think it was that high. We did get a trim grant, which helped to offset the costs last year that we spent for the removal and replacements as well. I don't think the number was quite that high. I want to say it was around 100 and a quarter maybe, but I don't recall anything.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we've got that motion on the floor. Don't see any other comments on the list, so all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? The motion passes. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next item. This is a proposed purchase of a new Chevrolet Colorado pickup truck. Rick?
Thank you, Chair Garitano and Drive safely back, gentlemen.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think just to keep in mind, I know the weather's supposed to turn to some ice, so it is 8 o'clock here, so I'd like to see how much we can get done in the next 30 minutes, and then we'll pause and see if we defer any potential items to the next meeting.
If I hear anything that it's changing, I'll let you know right away. But
Good point, yeah, we would know from Rick. Good, go ahead, Rick.
So, committee members, in the budget this year, we have set aside $30,000 in the capital budget to replace existing vehicles that city staff use. So this year, we have a Chevrolet Colorado pickup truck that's used by code enforcement staff on a daily basis that we would like to replace with that money that's been budgeted. The vehicle they're driving is a 2008 model, it has almost 150,000 miles on. It's showing its wear and tear, and we'd like to get them into a new vehicle. So that's the recommendation. We do take advantage of the state cooperative purchasing program. So we can take the bids that are obtained statewide through that contract, and Don Brown Chevrolet is the local dealer that would supply the vehicle. They provide a quote for the purchase. So that's the recommendation to the committee to purchase the Chevy Colorado. The purchase price is $29,538. So I'm open to any questions that you may have.
So we're ready.
We talked about this at city council meeting last time. I'll make a motion to support the recommendation.
Okay, so we have Councilmember Remy making a motion, seconded by Councilmember Farmer. Discussion on the motion. Councilmember Stevens, you have your hand up?
Yes, just curious, how often do they actually use the 4x4? That's a pretty big expense. Is it necessary for 4x4 for this truck?
Yeah, it's necessary. I can't tell you exactly how often they use it, but they do go off-road in it, and when they're out inspecting work on new subdivisions, new developments, they are getting off-road, so yeah, it's something we need to have in the vehicle.
And then what happens to the old truck? Does that get sold, or?
The thought would be ultimately to trade it. Sam's got some ideas about potentially getting some pricing on trading the vehicle. Don Brown did give us a quote about $1,000 to trade it. I think we're going to shop the
Yeah, so
business.
I think the state of Missouri, through their cooperative procurement program, actually allows cities to participate in online auction programs and services, and several cities have had a great deal of success getting rid of surplus vehicles through that method. I think the truck we have now is high mileage for us, but I still think, we care for it properly, so I certainly thought we would get more than 1,000.
More than 1,000, okay, good. Okay, cool, thanks.
Okay, with that motion on the floor, any other discussion? All right, everyone understand the motion? Holly, you got it?
I do.
Okay, then all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstained? The motion passes. Thank you. All right, moving on to the next item, the federal funding agreement for the Wild Horse Creek Road Bridge Replacement Project in Ward 1.
Thank you very much, Chair Garitano. Last year, we were awarded federal funding to construct or replace the existing bridge on Wild Horse Creek Road, which is 1,400 feet north, more or less, of Austin Fort Road. That existing bridge is structurally deficient, and we were awarded $1.36 million in federal funds to rebuild that project. It does require a 20% local match, which would equate to about $340,000 that the city would be responsible for. So in order to secure the funding, as we always are required on these federal projects, we have to execute an agreement with MoDOT, and they administer the project and the federal funds. So we have been submitted the agreement by MoDOT and are required to turn it around and execute it in order to secure the funding. So the recommendation to the committee is to move forward to execute the federal funding agreement to secure the federal funds for the reconstruction of the Wild Horse Creek Bridge project. And Bill, for any questions?
Rick, is this as you're coming down Austin Ford or Wild Horse Creek coming down, is this the first bridge or the second bridge? Is this the one-lane bridge?
This is the second bridge. It's
The
not
second
one
bridge. Okay. So the residents in that area that had objection to the widening of the one-lane bridge, this is not impacting that.
I would like to say that's true, but I probably can't. We will be working, well, there's a landowner that owns quite a bit of property that fronts both bridges, frankly, so we will be talking to that property owner about this.
But this is a
project as well.
two-lane bridge, that would be a new two-lane bridge?
That's correct.
Okay. Because I actually do think the one-lane bridge does slow down traffic. I drive it quite often.
That one I can see a little bit, that location possibly.
But I don't, but this will be going back, I mean, if this is approved, it's still, it's something that communication with the resident, there's a follow-up there.
Absolutely. We have not done that yet. The engineer is due to finish up some work for us, and then envisioned that we would probably meet with the property owner. We did, you may recall, we had the same engineer look at replacing or putting together some preliminary cost to replace the single-lane bridge, and then there's one further down in Austinport as well, that's
Okay.
in poor condition. Those two structures are shorter than 20 foot in length, so they're not directly eligible for the federal funding.
Oh, okay.
Which is why we went after it for this one. So we still, I guess, envision possibly someday replacing those other two as well. So we'd probably like to talk to the property about all three of those projects.
Okay, anything else on this? So, Rick, I'm assuming you're gonna request then, what to proceed with this?
So yeah, I would like a motion approving the recommendation. If that's so, I will take it to the city council for approval of the agreement.
Okay, made by Councilmember Brost, and I'm trying to see, I think Councilmember Ray, did you raise your hand?
Nope.
No, okay, so Councilmember Edens, I did see your hand. So, seconded by Councilmember Edens. Carla, you got the motion?
I do.
All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion passes. All right, moving on to the next item on the agenda, contractor bids for 2020 concrete street and sidewalk replacement project. Rick?
Thank you again. Some of you probably know, every year we have in recent memory solicited for bids for our concrete and sidewalk replacement project. And we did the same in January, and as of January 23rd, we opened bids for this year's project. We do have budgeted under the, actually the Road and Bridge Fund, a total of $950,000 this year, which includes $800,000 for concrete street slabs and another $150,000 for sidewalk work. So we opened bids, and we did get 6 contractors that submitted bids, and we had a new contractor as a low bidder this year, which was E. Meyer. Kelp Contracting was the second low bid. I think second low bid last year. So we have a new contractor that is the low bidder. So that is the recommendation to the committee, is that we move forward, and we are recommending authorization of a contract with E. Meyer for this year's concrete street slab and sidewalk replacement project. The authorized amount is actually going to be slightly less than the bid, and the reason being we got a little bit, there was a little uncertainty when we put the project out in terms of what we thought it would come in at, and we were going to scale it back slightly and under budget. And we talked to the contractor about that, and they were agreeable with that direction. So that's, if you notice that discrepancy, that is why that's there. So that is the recommendation. I will tell you that I did talk to Town and Country, since we have not worked with E. Meyer before. We did talk to Town and Country as well as DePere, and they both had positive things to say of their work for concrete street replacement project. So they are one of our right-of-way maintenance contractors as well. You may be familiar with that for 2020. And they also recently won the bid for that small turn lane project at Lexington Woods and Route 109. So in short order, they've got some work in the city of Wildwood, and they're looking forward to working with them on this project. So that is the recommendation. If the committee approves the recommendation, I will take it to the full city council for the approval of the agreement.
All right. Anyone want to make a motion? Councilmember
I'll
Bertolino?
Move to accept recommendation.
All right, moving to accept the recommendation, seconded by Councilmember Rennie. The motion on the floor. All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstained? Motion passes. Okay, moving on next, we have number 5, the proposed staining of concrete traffic barrier on Route 109 at Pond River Loop Road, Wards 1 and 5. And just in case, because I think there was an email forwarded from Councilmember McCutcheon on this item, I think it was sent late before the meeting started, so just want to make sure you all saw that. So Rick?
Yes, sir, thank you very much. As I'm sure most of you know, about 5 years ago, WODOT completed improvements to 109 from basically Route 100 up to Clayton Road. And that project, the city helped fund the project. It was also funded through some federal and state funds. At the time, the project included 2 roundabouts. And then at Pond Grover Loop Road, there's a pedestrian tunnel that goes underneath the road. And along the pedestrian tunnel are concrete barriers, about 600 foot of concrete barrier. And if you're not familiar with the location, I can certainly pull it up on Google Maps or Street View if you want to see what it looks like. But when it was constructed, at that time we did get some comments that indicated that some residents did not like the appearance of the concrete barriers. Ms. McCutcheon has brought that to my attention previously. I will say that. And by and large, we did make an effort on the project, as you noted, to include some aesthetic enhancements in the project. You know, the medians are landscaped, the roundabouts are landscaped. The retaining walls are stained and tinted a certain beige color. So there were some attempts at the time made to enhance the looks of the project. We didn't do anything at the time with the barriers. It was not discussed, and no one suggested it, it just was overlooked. With the project that's under construction right now, from 100 through Main Street, we did again also incorporate some aesthetic improvements in that project. I'm sure many of you are aware of that. We, with the bridge project, agreed to fund the staining of the barrier on that bridge. As well as that bridge, if you look at it, there is a stone finish on the outside of the barrier. And then we will landscape the medians. And then to the south of the new bridge, the concrete barrier walls that have been constructed adjacent to the tunnel there are planned to be stained to match the barrier on the bridge right now with the project that's under construction. So essentially what we're suggesting is we have an opportunity, if we want to do it, now is a great time to consider the possibility of also staining the barriers that were constructed 5 years ago at Palm Grover Loop Road, because the contractor is going to be out there this spring doing the work at 100 to the south. It would be very easy for them to go up and hit the barriers at Palm Grover Loop Road. The other thing I will mention, and you probably know this, when we've constructed new bridges, we have tried to aesthetically enhance the barrier walls on the outside. Typically, we have stained them or tinted them a color or shade. And the outside, we have typically included a form liner finish, stone finish, or we've done some other techniques to try to beautify the barrier. So it's not inconsistent with what we've done elsewhere throughout the city. So that is the recommendation. We did request the contractor to provide us a bid for their cost to do that work, and I provided in the memo. That number was just over $13,000. And so if we wanted to move forward, what we would do is we would ask WODOT to execute a change order with Kirshenson Construction for this additional work. The city would be paying that cost as a change order through the construction work on Route 109. Essentially, when that project is wrapped up later this year, the final price tag will be made available to the city. At that point, we would see that $13,000 show up, and we would, depending on where that falls out and shakes out relative to the original check we wrote, we may owe them a little bit of money, we may get a check back. It just depends. So that is the recommendation, is to consider staining the existing barriers on 109 at Palm Grover Loop Road, essentially to match the work to the south, for the price of just over $13,000.
The stain, I'm assuming it seeps into the concrete, and maybe you seal it, maybe you don't, but it lasts, right? We don't have to restain it, or are we restaining this in 10 years?
I think it's fair to say that there is a limited lifespan on the stain. Probably can't give you a specific number. I think 10 years is probably a pretty good estimate. One of the things that's on my mind is I referenced bridge barriers that we've already done on some of the newer bridges around town. Many of those bridges are dating to 15 years or thereabout life or age, and those barriers are starting to show some wear and tear. We'll probably have to look at doing something here in the coming years to touch them up, paint over them, stain over them. They're going to need some attention. So there's definitely a limited lifespan.
So, do you foresee us continuing with staining, or as opposed to some other type of decorative stamping with other concrete layers on top? I mean, staining in perpetuity, that's where we're at?
Are you referring to the existing bridges that we have,
Or just areas that need touched up? I mean, or any staining that fades, we're gonna continue to restain as opposed to doing a different type of treatment or a different type of aesthetic in the future?
I guess to answer your question, I haven't decided yet what
Okay.
really makes the most sense. What I was planning to do was engage, and we're getting a little off subject, but engage one of the contractors that does a lot of that work in terms of, what do those cost if they mobilize and say, one of the bridges that we have on Oval Road, right near Shepherd, is one of them. Get a price from them to do that work, to see what we're looking at from a ballpark standpoint, and use that for planning purposes, and then maybe next year or the year after start phasing some of that work in. But I don't think you're talking about a huge amount of money. You're probably talking on the order of almost maybe a similar amount, 10,000 per bridge.
Okay.
So if we phased in over, every green did a few of those, it wouldn't be a huge impact. That would be the thought.
Okay, and I know exactly where this is, but I can't picture what it looks like before and what it will look like after. Can you help me with that on a photo, or no?
I don't know that I have an artist rendition. The closest thing would be some of the graphics that we put together for the construction work that's ongoing. Take me a little bit of digging to get to those photographs, but when we brought that to the council, it was well over a year ago, we did have some artist renderings showing the 109 bridge, and what it would look like. But the inside face, it would be a beige light brown color is what the goal would be.
It's
so
gray
not dark
now,
brown,
right?
it'd be a
Yeah,
light
it's just
brown.
gray.
A light line.
Okay. Councilman Rennie?
Quick question, this sounds fine to me, but is there any opportunity to bring in actual artists to actually do something different than just stain them?
Like a mural?
Yeah. Add some color.
Can you clarify, like, are you talking about, like, something, like, actually painted? Like,
Yes, like those are right there, yeah, sure, something.
Or like
a
the
mural.
levee down Chesterfield Valley.
Right, like, so I come from the East Coast, a place called New York, where they have a lot of these things. You may have heard of it. I've seen it. Yeah, but it's a lot of color, and it's not graffiti.
Yeah. Well, I think, have you ever gotten that kind of request?
I don't know that I've seen, what we've done on a lot of the bridges, we've incorporated that stone finish.
Right.
And they're actually staining, and that's what they're doing on the backside of the 109 bridge. They're actually staining each one of those slightly differently by hand, essentially. So it's a similar idea, I suppose, but not exactly. I think that, yeah, we could certainly look into that. I don't know how MoDOT would feel about that.
Mhm.
That's the other thing, this is MoDOT's road, it's their barrier. Get too crazy, they may not be all excited about it, but we could certainly look into it.
I would anticipate them saying that might be a distraction to motorists
Mhm.
and would therefore not be in favor.
But now that you just said that, now they're completely going to be opposed to it because you just brought it to.
Yeah.
We've had similar
Yeah.
discussions before in other cities.
Okay.
Depends on how
Yeah.
unusual, how eye-catching it might be, if it was
Sure.
more of a
Okay.
Councilman Brody?
Yeah, my only thought on this is that those are subject to being damaged, those guardrails, and we've already replaced part of the guardrail on that roundabout once. And if we have replaced sections of that because some semi slapped against it, will MoDOT pay to stain it again.
We're going to be accountable for repairing any stain, I'm sure of that. I mean, if they were to replace the barrier because it got damaged, they would replace it as it is now. And we would be looking to go in and stain it back, I'm sure. Because that's just the way they treat it.
Which gets me to the art issue.
Let's just vote. Let's just vote on the stain. Sounds like I know exactly where you're right.
May I'd just like to say that, you know, the staining of the concrete, it's just the more of it that we do, the more maintenance there will be. And is it necessary? So I go through that area a lot.
Right.
I've been on that, I'm just trying to picture it better. You know, the thing is if not only driving, but cycling, it's like, I haven't noticed it, so does it really pop that much?
I mean, give me maybe a similar project that we did, and Rick, can be honest here, at 100 between West Glen and 109, that guardrail is stained. It's something we took on as an extra step. I think it's kind of a wood type guardrail, and then I remember that we had a discussion about staining it, if I recall.
We did stain that, yeah, there's a timber rail there between Taylor and West Glen Farms on 100, and similar idea. We stained that guardrail, the timber rail, in part for aesthetics, in part for preservation. Which is probably a similar price, quite frankly, if I recall, but.
Councilman Wren.
I don't know about voting, but I'd love this to go to council, and we can, but if at the meeting, could we have just pictures
Yeah.
to look at? And then if there's intended stain-looking pictures to compare, that might be nice to look at to understand the gravity of the situation.
So anyone want to make a motion to send this to council with the recommendation?
Sure.
All right, motion made by Councilmember Remy, seconded by Councilmember Farmer. Any other discussion? All right, Farley got the motion.
I do.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion-
Abstain.
Yeah, one abstention. Motion passes. Well, voted.
Rick, is it possible just to note what the savings would be to align it with the other work versus standalone,
Great.
if possible?
Just a ballpark.
Yeah, just not now, but, you know, because I think that's the incentive right now. that people who want it more so.
Could be, yeah. We'll get that some thought.
Just not a hard number, but
Yeah.
if it's $500, it may not be worth it.
Okay. All right, we have several items that are not ready for action. Miscellaneous? Okay, next meeting, March 3rd, and adjournment. A motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Made by Councilmember Bertolino and seconded by Councilmember Farmer. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion passes. Thank you.
When you say our next meeting was March 10th? Joe?
March 3rd.
3rd.
Is it the first one, is it Tuesday, or is it the second? First. It is first. It's your Tuesday, rather.
First.
Okay, sounds good.
Got it.
So did you beat Team Stevens in basketball?
I didn't play.
Oh, you didn't play?
No, I've been sick.
Basket?
I'm going to play soccer. Yeah, I'm sick for other reasons. I couldn't play. I had a fun heart rate rhythm.
I don't know.